Hi everyone, Katie Crysdale here from Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. Thanks so much for joining us. We are going to be going live here in just a minute with Coach Dave Ling of the Newmarket Stingrays Swim Club. Want to chat about FINA, the organization, the Fédération Internationale de Natation. So I'm going to be chatting here with Dave in just a moment. Just adding in Dave.
Oh, gotta turn this camera around. All right,
Hey, the first time, if it worked the first time, that's incredible.
This is a step in the right direction here.
All good. Still you?
Yep, still here. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Dave?
I'm doing very well. My wife says hello, and she told me I had to get that in, otherwise I was fired. So,
well, what about the girls? I don't get any hello from the girls.
They're sleeping. This is past their bedtime, so that's what they're up to.
So let me introduce what we're going to chat about, and then I'm going to have you introduce yourself. So I invited Dave on here to chat about FINA. And a lot of people might be familiar that earlier this week there was a news story that FINA had banned the application by Soul Caps, which is a company that creates bathing caps for individuals with larger hair, often black athletes, black swimmers. And so there was an immediate outcry about, FINA being disconnected from reality. And I got to thinking, like, I was never a competitive swimmer. What is the role that FINA plays in sport? And I'm going to get Dave to introduce himself and why he's totally qualified to chat with me about why do we even care about FINA? Like, what is FINA doing? So Dave, tell us, who are you? What do you do? Yeah.
Yep, my name is Dave Ling. I'm the head coach of the Newmarket Stingrays. Been in the coaching world for, about 12 years now. And before that, I swam for 17 years. So well aware of FINA, what it is, who they are, what they do. And given where we are in this Olympic cycle, I guess I'm your go-to person to talk about anything involving the competitive pool.
Yeah, so why don't you start with that? So we're a couple weeks out from the Olympics. They're going to hopefully run. I mean, I think up until the last moment, who knows what it's going to look like. What are you seeing with swimming right now and the Olympics and all of that to set us up for, 2021?
For us in Canada, the Olympics are going to look pretty normal in that there'll be no spectators in the stands. There was no spectators in the stands at our Olympic trials a few weeks ago. This is a real exciting time for swimming. As a coach and as a fan of swimming in general, this is when people come out to show their best. We've had an extra year that we've had to wait to get there. There are some exciting storylines. There's certainly an interest in now that Michael Phelps is retired, is who's going to fill that vacuum that's obviously gone out. And then we'll see what everybody's got. It should be a very interesting competition. Some countries have handled COVID really differently than the others, so we'll see what that yields. I'm just really excited, and usually for our clubs, on the back end, it's usually a good recruiting tool when families watch the Olympics and they come out of it. We tend to get a bounce of interest in competitive swimming. This year should be interesting, especially in Ontario where I am, is we'll have to, instead of having a cattle call worth of recruiting opportunities, we're going to have to be very careful in how we deal with public health and be able to offer tryouts. We'll still also try to refill our club.
Yeah. Well, and to give some people context, if you're watching from the States or another country, so in Canada here, we had delayed access to vaccines. And so the general population here in Canada really only started to get deep into the younger ages of vaccines in May and June, and second doses in June and July. So as Dave mentioned, where he's located in Ontario, the biggest province in Canada, near Toronto, the biggest city, I mean, they've still been in shades of lockdown. Pools have not been open to the general. Indoor pools have not been open to the average swimmer. I mean, unless you're a high performance athlete, and that was, I'm sure, a very selective process, who got to train and they didn't get to race the last 15, 18 months at this point.
Yeah, it was obviously a very selective process. I think in Ontario, they had an initial set of high-performance athletes that trained most of the year, and then they even trimmed that down even further in the third wave to really skinny it down even more, which made even fewer opportunities. So it's been really it's been tough for a lot of kids.
So that's kind of the context that we're living in. And I mean, let's layer on, in addition to the pandemic in the last couple of years, we've had, you know, cultural reckoning with different movements, whether it's Me Too movement in terms of sexual harassment, Black Lives Matter movement. And so we're seeing a lot of these organizations across different industries really consider what their role is. Professional sports, especially something like the NBA, how they reacted last year to the Black Lives Matter movement, different sporting movements. And so it was really interesting to me this week to see FINA come out, I don't want to say against the bathing cap, because I know there's going to be a rigorous process for approval, but can you talk to us about what does FINA represent in swimming, and why do they matter to, you know, like a regular competitive swimmer, let's say a 14-year-old? How do they impact their training or their, you know, competition?
Their swimming experience in general. So FINA, for the most part, to an average 14-year-old, or an average swimmer in general, doesn't have much of an impact until you go to compete, right? If you have an opportunity to go to a pool and watch a swim meet, you'll see a white tag on the lower back, upper buttocks of the swimmer, and that'll be a little FINA tag to say that suit's been approved for competition, right? And those are checked every time that there's a world record broken. If you watch the Olympics, those suits have all been vetted. They've all been rigorously tested and made sure they want to do it. That dates back to, obviously, about 12 years ago, which is another suit situation that if you want to get into, I'll bore you with that. But for the most part, FINA acts as a regulator. They make sure that they set all the rules. But for the most part, the average swimmer does not feel FINA's presence all that much. And then if you're the upper level of swimming administration, which I am not, but from what I understand and what I've experienced, is FINA can be a rather polarizing body. There's some people that think they do a great job in that they've added events at the Olympics, they've created more opportunities for medals, they've expanded the interest of our sport, and they've generally done a pretty good job on that end. But then you end up with the controversy that we had this week, which is a very bad look for an organization that's not necessarily deemed or perceived as progressive.
For sure. And I definitely want to talk about the laser situation in just a moment, because I think a lot of people might not know what that was. Yes. But definitely with FINA, I think it's so interesting to me because they're kind of a lobby group. They're kind of a national, like they represent the sport. But then, you know, I have to wonder what types of people are at that level of the organization. Are they competitive swimmers, or are they people who are 40 years removed from the sport that are paid administrators that are really not the beating heart of the sport?
Well,
right?
I mean, you could just take, for instance, that just elected a new president of FINA. So the new president of FINA actually elevated from vice president. And to give you an idea, he's probably a remarkably uncontroversial person, except for he's been implicated or at least tied to the FIFA, the soccer body scandal that broke a couple of years ago. He's from Kuwait, and he's tied into a lot of different Olympic initiatives with that part of the world. But important to note, and not casting judgment, is that the Kuwaiti Swim Association is not supported by FINA.
Interesting. That's definitely a twist.
Right.
Okay.
There's been some issues there. I'm not intimately familiar with them, but I do know that it's pretty interesting to choose your leader from that pool.
Yeah. Well, and I the longer I spend in the swimming world, in the facility side of things, you see whether it's a not-for-profit or whether it's just these professional associations where often it's professional managers that go from association to association, and they don't have a deep passion for the topic of the association or the focus, but their professional administrators are really good at fundraising or really good at strategizing. And it's sometimes interesting to see where these people end up and how how that shakes out, right? So definitely want to connect people to, if you're actually, I'm going to come back to this. Let's talk about the laser suit situation.
Okay.
What happened? Because I remember living it, but I don't remember kind of how it ended and where we ended up from that.
So this is the most jealous topic of my life here. I'm 41 years old. I swam until 2004, and I was a decent swimmer, not a great swimmer. I was a decent swimmer, but I'm a big guy, and I would have loved what happened just after I finished swimming. Is they started to wave in these suits. They started to kind of come into vogue, and they were made purely of polyurethane, flash rubber, which let swimmers ride a little bit higher in the water. It was more buoyant, made swimmers super fast. World records were dropping left and right. I mean, it was an incredible pace and an incredible evolution of the sport, to the point that people worried about the integrity as to whether these suits were hurting the sport or helping the sport. And there was a reckoning in 2009 where they decided, this is it. We are going to ban a polyurethane suit, and we're going to start to police the materials in which our suits are being made. And they went back to textile suits. I'm no fashionista, so I'm not going to tell you the difference between what's going on there. But the last meet in which they were able to wear those polyurethane suits were the World Championships in Rome in 2009. And there are still a few very important records out there that are from that era, that swim meet. And not just world records, but a lot of national records as well, still held in those suits. So that's a pretty fascinating thing. It was probably for the best that they didn't. I love those shiny suits. I probably am in the minority. I thought it was excellent. I thought it really made the sport fascinating. It's tough. I was watching some track and field last week with the American Track and Field Olympic Trials, and you hear a lot about, it wasn't at the American Olympic Trials, but at the same time, a gentleman broke the 400-meter hurdles world record. And the record itself was, I think, 25, 24 years old. That's a long time to wait for a world record to be broken. Swimming's had a much greater pace of world record development. But they thought that the suits that were made out of rubber that help people float artificially was a step too far.
Well, and I remember guarding and working in that period, and it was like a world record. It's perceived to me, as somebody who didn't follow them closely, but it seemed like they were being shattered every couple months. Like it was just constantly and substantial changes, not down, 1 second, like several seconds or hundredths of a second. And like you said, the plastic was almost like a sausage casing that would allow you to float, and took like 45 minutes to put your body into, right? Like I remember one swim meet where the swimmer was running out to make their event when I worked at the University of Toronto and you were coaching. Like the swimmer almost missed their event because they couldn't shove themselves into the suit in time. In
all fairness, the suits aren't much better right now, right? Like there's still kids when we do get back to racing eventually in this country. They're still taking forever to get those suits on, especially new suits. They're still exceptionally, it's a skill in itself just to actually get in them. Usually you need a friend to help you out, especially if you're a female. And that's fascinating stuff.
So let's talk about your understanding of the equipment situation. Is the default that the equipment has to be approved to race in it? Like a company has to apply for certification for it to be valid? Or is the default that if it's a normal design, it's just accepted?
When it comes to international competition, certainly the timing and the process of testing and approving equipment is absolutely essential. I am not intimately familiar with how long and how rigorous that process is, but certainly the optics of what's happened in the last week are horrific.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to recap, we're chatting with Dave Ling, and I asked him to hop on because I wanted to talk about FINA, which is the Fédération Internationale de Natation, right? International Swimming Federation. And the big scandal last weekend was that Soul Caps, a company out of the UK, had applied to have their caps certified for use in the Olympics, and they create a larger style of cap that accommodates athletes with larger hair, or just different shapes of heads. Like we've all struggled with regular traditional bathing caps. If you have an odd head, wearing 1 or 2 or 3 caps, especially if you have a lot of hair, and the optics that arguably this white, old-fashioned, traditional organization is saying one of the words that was used was does not conform to traditional head shape or head size is really, really bad on a lot of levels.
Yeah, I don't think FINA's been the masters of public relations in terms of how they've handled many of their situations, but this one is certainly exceptionally bad.
So one of the other things I want to chat about that's kind of related, and I know, Dave, we've talked about this, is this movement in the last couple years, the International Swim League, which has developed. There's an excellent article I want to point everyone to, Outside Magazine, April 2021. It's called basically The Man Who Tried to Kill the Olympics, and it profiles this Russian oligarch who decides that he wants to fund basically sport swimming and that the athletes are going to be financially compensated. And it kind of slaps in the face of the Olympics, and especially looking at the NCAA decision in the US last week, the Supreme Court, or 2 weeks ago, compensating athletes. How different is the International Swim League from what we currently see in swimming?
Well, what the International Swim League did is it created a threat to FINA's grasp on high-performance swimming, basically. It offered an alternative for high-performance swimmers to ply their trade, make a buck, bring attention to the sport, but was outside of the FINA envelope. What FINA has done traditionally, when everybody watches the Olympics, but between them, there's a series of FINA-sponsored and run World Cups and other events. And there was some conflict in terms of timing between these World Cups and the launch of the International Swim League. And basically the initial attempt of FINA was to try and say, hey, if you're going to go participate in this, then you're not going to be allowed to play in this sandbox over here. That was met with incredible negativity, and rightfully so. The International Swim League certainly has its warts and its faults, but in general, they've done a great job driving a little bit of attention to the sport. It's not exactly a ubiquitous, I need to watch it every year type of thing, but the International Swim League is probably the closest thing that we have to that might drive somewhat casual viewer base. And certainly the swimming community itself loves it. It's exciting. It's fun. It's just a different mix of things, and it's really nice. It's good to see.
Well, and for anybody who's not watched the International Swim League, the model is there's basically these teams, and they've grabbed some really amazing athletes. I believe Caleb Dressel, Katinka Hozu, and there's compensation tied to performance, but it's also team-based. So it's not just, one high-profile individual grabbing the money and grabbing all the attention. And they're located throughout the United States, as well as I think they did 2 locations in Europe. And from a pool operator perspective, the thing I love is they're really thinking about the event from a television perspective with graphics, lights, music. They're using acrylic panel pools, so you have the side view. Like, they're really thinking about the marketing and the customer who can watch, which is, in my experience anyway, very different from the very like not so flashy swim meets where you just get in and swim, right? The atmosphere is on the deck for the swimmers, but this is like very performance-based for spectators.
And the participants themselves, right? It is definitely an atmosphere they're creating. You're looking at teams in California, new team in Toronto, New York, team in London, team based out of Italy, a team based out of Hungary, and other teams that are, the Tokyo team. It is truly an international concept, although really the international borders of it all have very little relevancy to what the actual product is. But I guess the same could be said that none of the Toronto Blue Jays are from Toronto. But, I mean, they're trying, which is good. And it will enter. They swam their second season last fall in a bubble in Budapest. And they'll have a third season this fall, which I also believe is going to be bubbled as well.
So getting back to the Olympics for a moment, we were talking about FINA before and the equipment and the permission that they give to certain equipment. So if I'm a swimmer and I make it to the Olympics and I make it to an event and I hop in the pool and I don't medal or I don't place and I'm not wearing compliant bathing suit or bathing cap, are people going to notice, or how big of a deal is this to be, you know, in the context of things?
No one's going to notice on the viewership side except for their results won't count, and you know they will be disqualified for using illegal equipment or unsanctioned equipment. I shouldn't say illegal. Legal sounds incorrect, but yeah, unsanctioned equipment. And I would guess that there'll be no one who will end up in that situation in a couple weeks.
So their time would be disqualified,
yes,
regardless if they were first or eighth, kind of
regardless if they were first or 101st. It doesn't matter.
What about, so when I was a lifeguard at the deck level, just, you know, recreational meets or lower level competition, you would often see swimmers that they have their own hacks, right? Like wearing 2 or 3 bathing caps, or, you know, an extra pair of goggles, or does that fly at the Olympics, or is it totally, are there other weird things that people have to do at that level of sport?
All those caps, you know, are pretty much sanctioned until, you know, you might have been around in a swim meet that might have been a high school meet or a very grassrootsy level thing where the equipment there is less policed for obvious reasons. But in general, as you get up into higher levels, everybody's going to be wearing approved equipment all across the board. They can go 2 caps. Usually swimmers will go with a specialized, what they call dome cap over top, which has a certain set of hydrodynamics. Probably drives a little bit more speed than the unfortunate cap situations that I've been talking about recently, but it will be there, and all that equipment will have been vetted.
Well, and that was one of the things, I'm glad you brought it up, Dave, that I found so interesting, because with the sole cap, my understanding, having looked at the pictures, but I have not used it, I haven't got one in my hands, but I think it would create more resistance, and if the individual chose to wear it, it would actually create drag. And so I found it interesting that FINA would care at that level, right? That it to me, it would be an easy win to let athletes that want to use this product use it, because it's, in my opinion, you know, as a layperson, it's not going to help their time at all.
I think it's just simply a binary decision, approved or not approved. And really, whether it makes you faster or slower has no consequence to the situation. It's really just approved or not approved, similar to the situation with the 100-meter sprint woman in the U.S. in track and field. She knew the decision she made. It's a horrible situation, and culturally doesn't really fit the times in terms of how we're living in North America. But these are international decisions that are far beyond just the scope of Western values, and it's really just a simple approved or unapproved situation.
Well, and it's so interesting what you were saying. I was just reading an article this afternoon that was further expanding on the situations with the sprinter in the U.S. where she's been barred from participating in the Olympics because she tested positive for marijuana, which she consumed in a state where it was legal in the U.S. But this individual was explaining what you've just said, Dave, International Sporting Federation for Track and Field, that it's not a U.S. Olympic or track committee decision. It's part of 206 countries are part of a federation for track and field related to the Olympics. And basically they literally compared, you know, the United States and Saudi Arabia being in that same federation. So it's not a simple, oh, we can opt out this week. It's a far more complex network, fairly or not, like you said, to the situation.
Yeah, then a bunch of things, obviously, in our culture then conflated as a bunch of things that it's not. But really, it's just a binary yes or no. This is a no. Doesn't matter the whys, the motivation, the social justice to it, the progression level of it in terms of societal progression are just completely taken out of consideration, and it's just binary yes or no.
Well, and also the context too, which I thought was really interesting in this article I was reading. You know, when we think about you know, past Olympics, different sports, different countries that perhaps have been doping that we haven't been able to catch, or specific swimmers and specific performances. It's not fair necessarily, but it is the reality where FINA and all of these sports are governed by their international organizations, whether we like them or not at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we have a vote, but we're just really one of 206 votes.
For sure. So let's pretend you have a crystal ball, right? So we've got the Olympics coming up. 4 years from now, 3 years from now, do you think FINA is still going to be as powerful, as relevant as it is today and has been?
I don't see any reason why that would change in the short term. FINA, the president who just retired was a spry 84 years old upon retirement, and his replacement he's not exactly super young. So a lot of the outside perception of FINA is that it is run by a certain set of geriatric oligarchs, boomer power, but it will take time to drive it down a different aisle. And I know there's been some movement in terms of who's involved and who's trying to get politically interested in FINA, and they're doing a great job of drawing negative attention to themselves, which is usually a great catalyst for change. But it's going to take time, right? And to be honest, swimming in general is probably not the most progressive sport in the world. Even here in Canada, we certainly have our elements that are a little less than progressive. Obviously, there was a flap that hit home to you and I. I don't know if you follow this, Katie, is that after the Canadian Olympic trials a couple of weeks ago, Swim Canada announced their Olympic team, and they had a 5-man coaching team, which was received very negatively, in that it was the first time since 1996 that there was no female representation on the coaching staff. And subsequently, that's been corrected, and rightfully so. And they've named Linda Keeper, who we both know and think very highly of. She's been added to the coaching staff. But it took a public outcry to get it there.
Yeah.
In 2021.
So, and I think we could spend all day talking about the larger context of sport and the reckoning that a lot of organizations are having, either in a reactionary way or in a proactive way, right? So I know in my, for my whole lifetime, the 2000s, the last 22, 25 years, we've been talking about the relevancy of the Olympics in terms of the infrastructure investment. We look at places like Athens, where millions and billions was spent, and then the infrastructure was trashed because financially the country couldn't maintain it, right? Is it a sustainable model? No different from NCAA sport in the US. So the recent Supreme Court decision that NCAA athletes can use their name, image, and likeness for compensation, because the claim by the colleges that this is amateur sport is laughable, when the Sunshine List, the publicly paid officials in the U.S., the highest are the coaches at these public institutions. It's not anybody else.
Yeah,
and it funds football funds everything, right?
In the U.S., yes. Name, image, and likeness is a very fascinating topic. I won't get into it because I have a million thoughts about it, and I want to go to sleep at some point tonight, so I'm not going to go there. But I will say that I think it's exceptionally positive for the athletes, and I'm into anything that is positive progress for the athletes. That's really that time has come. I think the era of amateur sports at a high-performance level is essentially dying very quickly. If you are a highly skilled athlete or anything in this world, we're now getting to a point where you can actually be compensated properly for what it is. And I thought the Supreme Court decision was fascinating, and I know that different people have different thoughts, right, left, doesn't matter. Certainly they took them to task in a very unanimous fashion a couple weeks ago.
Well, and I think the other thing that's certainly come up for me, I watched a documentary a few months ago on HBO about just, the life of a high performance athlete, and somebody, one documentary was about Lindsey Vonn, the skier, and the team around her and the financial resources available to her. And then another documentary I watched the week later was about, I believe it was somebody doing skeleton or luge, right? That has to have a part-time job, that can barely afford to train. And what is that expectation from a country to have these athletes but then not support them? And it's all interconnected because there's no compensation at a lot of these international events, and it's not necessarily that they should be compensated, but yet we should also pay for what we want to watch or pay for what we're proud of. And I think that's something that is hopefully we're going to see more progress in one way or the other in the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, at least, even your highest profile athletes 40 years ago, 50 years ago, they were selling cars in the off season of their careers as well. So that the loser has to have a part-time job. At least they don't have to have a full-time job, right? Let's recognize the good here, because I imagine that a lot of people on the luge circuit getting ready for the Olympics in Beijing, they probably only do it part-time. And I'm talking about luging part-time.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, let's start to wrap up. But before we go, Dave, I want to hear your thoughts on the Olympics, who we should be watching, what events you're excited about. I know there was the 800-meter, not upset, but there was a surprise in the 800-meter at the Canadian trials in terms of who was going to make the team, who's going to go. So what are you excited to watch? Like events, people?
I thought you said you wanted to wrap up. I'm gonna just monologue here for a bit here. Okay, Canadians, what you got to watch is obviously we watched 5 years ago. We watched Penny Alexiak win a silver medal in the 100 fly, a gold medal in the 100 free, and a bunch of relay medals. And she was the first Olympian born in the 2000s to win medals. She's going to be there again. She's heating up. She's going to be exciting. It's going to be great. But you also want to watch this little whippersnapper from Etobicoke. Her name is Summer McIntosh, and she is for real. All right, she is super awesome. She's going to be swimming the 400 free, maybe the 800 free, the 1500 free. What you're going to see is very similar, hopefully, to what we saw from Michael Phelps in 2000 as a 15-year-old. Is she's going there to compete, and maybe something really good happens and she gets into a final. That'd be very exciting. But really, 3 years from now, when they're in Paris, it's going to be exceptionally exciting. So watch out for her. She's super duper exciting. To be honest, for Canadian swimming, because of the pandemic, and there's been very few swim meets this year, essentially zero with the exception of Olympic trials. If a Canadian wins a medal at the Olympics, it is a monster achievement in swimming. All right, because they are at a distinct competitive disadvantage after this year. Yeah. So any medal, big win. Bigger picture, swimming should be super duper exciting. The name that everybody talks about is Caleb Dressel, the American. He's obviously a big dude, big sleeve tattoo, super duper fast, favorite to win the 50 free, the 100 free, and the 100 butterfly. But watch out. In the 100 free, which is the glamour event, he could get beat by the Australian kid. All right? This kid, Kyle Chalmers. He's 23. Okay. He won the Olympic gold medal 5 years ago in Rio at 18. But for some reason, he's now the underdog. Very exciting stuff. Going to be very interesting. Other things to watch. I'm actually starting to come up with a podcast and maybe a YouTube show. And we were talking about the women's 100 backstroke. That's pretty pertinent to Canadians. Young lady Kylie Moss is a double world champion. She's in a very deep event there. The world record in the women's 100 back was just broke by an Aussie girl, Kaylee McCune, just a couple weeks ago. So that's going to be a dogfight to see who wins there. And the women's 100 fly, also very exciting, Canadian Maggie McNeil. She's got a chance to win. She was a big star of NCAA swimming this year, and she's probably Canada's best hope to get on the medal podium. And if she does, then maybe others can get there as well. But she is probably our best hope to do that. So really excited for those. Really excited to see Katie Ledecky. Some people think she's in deep versus an Australian girl named Ariane Titmus. Should be very exciting. Could be the changing of the guard, or it could be just the old girl still got it situation. And in general, it will be a real fascinating study of how nations handled the pandemic, how they're able to support their high-performance athletes, not just in swimming, but in every sport out there, who's able to excel despite what's been an exceptionally difficult set of circumstances.
Well, and what I always like about you, Dave, is that you're like me. You'll call a spade, and I agree that I would love to say that our medal prospects are great, but we've been so disadvantaged in Canada. Our athletes have been so disadvantaged by the lockdown strategies that our governments have taken in fairness to a crisis situation. But you're going to look at countries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I just think, like a country like China or Russia, where, Russia not necessarily known for swimming, but just the culture we think of Russian sport or Chinese sport, where sport is in its own category with all kinds of exemptions and permissions and incredible financial support. What is that going to look like up against the average Canadian athlete that had to contend with a lot of red tape the last year?
An exceptional amount. So go Canada, go. We're all cheering for you. This does not impact my fandom. I'm not all of a sudden going to start to throw on a Uruguay T-shirt or something like that and cheer for them. But I'm a realist, and I really think that if someone, as Canadians win medals, as they've been training in Canada for the last 16 months, that is just an exceptional achievement, regardless of the sport.
With the Australian girl that you said is up against Katie Ledecky, yes. Are you thinking changing at the guard, like back to Australia being dominant, like Ian Thorpe early 2000s, or just that event Katie Ledecky has owned?
So both. In essence, both, right? What you have is you've got a girl in Katie Ledecky who goes to London in 2012, wins the Olympic gold medal in the 800 free, is easily the star of the show at the 2016 Olympics, and people assume that dominance will never end. Well, eventually it does come to an end, and she looked rather mortal at the American Olympic trials. Now, she hasn't raced a whole bunch. It could be that she was just getting ready, and she was at a different part in her preparation cycle. But in turn, the Australian Olympic trials, which were aired on Amazon Prime and are still available if you want to go back and watch it, and it was a great production. All right.
Good. Okay.
You can go back and watch this Arian Titmus girl. She is the real deal. She is smoking fast. She's swimming the same events essentially, and she is an absolute serious threat. Where no one was a serious threat to Katie Ledecky in 2016, this girl's a serious threat. I mentioned Kyle Chalmers versus Caleb Dressel. There are some really good Aussie swimmers out there that do pose a very serious threat. In some of the relay events, people remember the French versus the U.S. at the 2008 Olympics, where Jason Lezak had an incredible finish to the race and secured Michael Phelps getting his 8th gold medal. But it was that close. The world got that close. On the women's side, I think you're going to see a lot of the world very close, if not beating up on the U.S. a little bit. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty exciting. This is probably stands or is poised to be not the U.S. coronation of Olympic excellence in swimming, and really maybe the rest of the world punching back a little bit, which is pretty exciting. Where I sit, I think that's pretty exciting.
Well, I think it's nice to see variety. I mean, I loved watching Michael Phelps as much as the next person, but if there's a foregone conclusion, it doesn't make people motivated to watch the race, right? So I know, for example, I remember very distinctly, I don't remember his name, but the athlete who had grown up in Singapore that upset Michael Phelps's event, right? And that was exciting because it wasn't just another Michael Phelps adding to his 27 medals, right? It was exciting.
Yeah, you're creating stars. So I guess in a way, without Michael Phelps and without Ryan Lochte at this Olympics, we have the opportunity to hopefully see new stars. And hopefully people are interested enough to tune in, or I hope that their reaction is, excuse me, no thank you, I'm not tuning in. No Michael Phelps, wake me up when he makes a comeback, or when Boomer is ready in 10 years to take his throne.
Yeah, I hadn't even considered that, but that makes sense too.
Right, his son's getting, he should be getting in the swim team pretty soon, and we'll see if the apple falls far from the tree.
Well, I do know that Pampers has sponsored, their water diapers has sponsored his swimming so far, so we'll see.
Listen, if they could sponsor my daughter's swim diapers, that'd be great. If anybody from Pampers or Huggies is watching, call me. I'm there. I'll be your influencer. I've got 4 or 5 followers. I think we got 2 viewers on right now, so clearly we're crushing it. But yeah, no, good for them. Anybody can make a buck. I'm all for it.
Well, and one of the other things I appreciated, Dave, that you said is that how swimming is a sport where some athletes, they do very much grow into it. So somebody like Brent Hayden has been around for a long time and obviously a lot of injuries, but no different from equestrian, right? Like Ian Miller got better with age. This is a sport where if you don't get injured, and it, depending on your event, I don't know if I'm sure it's longer events, especially not the 50 free, but that you can get better with age, and the experience of the Olympics not being an upsetting, like, too shocking to the system, that you can still perform.
With the attention that Michael Phelps has brought the sport since his emergence, is come a new generation of professional swimmers. There are far more professional swimmers able to make a living, or at least make a bunch of money, maybe not necessarily living, off of swimming, which has just enabled the athletes to take care of themselves better nutrition, better support. You say you were watching the HBO show, looking into all the resources and assets that goes into getting someone like Lindsey Vonn on top of the ski hill is certainly fascinating. Same thing with high-performance athletes in just about every sport now, is they need that integrated support team around them to be able to get there. This is certainly not the tale of one's individual moxie that is getting them to Olympic gold in just about 99% of the cases.
Well, I'm so glad you said those, the trials, the Australian trials are available on Amazon Prime. There is also a mini-series I saw on Amazon Prime. I should watch it before it disappeared, but I believe it was the US, somebody preparing to go to the US trials, 4 episodes.
It's getting ready to go to the Australian trials. That's the Cody Simpson documentary. So if you're into pop music, the guy who coached him, the guy Brett Hawk, he's got a fascinating podcast, and he's actually going to do a live second screen probably on YouTube during the Olympics, and he's a fascinating guy to listen to, because you'd be hard-pressed to find a better expert to tell you about high-performance swimming than Brett Hawk. So his role right now is he's kind of taking a step back from high-performance swimming, and he's able to provide that type of feedback. So Brett Hawk, Hawke, look him up. If you need a second screen experience when watching Olympic swimming, you will get some rather fascinating commentary.
Do we know, is Byron commenting for Canada, or what's happening for Canada?
I'm sure he is. I do not know if he is going or whether they are going to do the broadcast from Canada. I know there's a lot of people that are going. That's probably a surprising number of people that are going, especially given that Tokyo just went into a state of emergency. I know that the head of the IOC, Thomas Bach, arrived in Tokyo today to try and help out a little bit, but I was listening to a show today, and they were talking, as press members, they're not allowed to go anywhere, do anything. They're essentially told not to talk to anybody Japanese because there's so much hostility towards these games from the local public. So we just got to survive it. Survive in advance. Just get through this. 3 years from now in Paris, it's going to be a ball, but we got to survive in advance for now.
Well, it's such a difficult situation on both sides, right? You've got individuals, that have trained their whole life. This is maybe their one opportunity to go, and they're going to be racing without spectators. They're going to be racing without the party atmosphere. They're going to be not having the full experience, but maybe grateful to be able to go. And then on the flip side, like you said, animosity from the host country in terms of prioritization, in terms of infrastructure, right? The money that they've spent to host the Olympics, and now here we are, you can't have the Olympics as planned. I don't think there's any perfect solution that would make everyone happy. It's like you said, a couple years from now, we're going to be able to look back and say, yes, that was the right move, or no, that was a terrible decision, and it had different consequences.
I'm willing to say that probably from the baseline competitors' experience is, yeah, they'd rather their fans be there, but they're just glad they get to go and they get to participate. Someone like Maggie McNeil, who's going to race the women's 100 butterfly, has got a chance to win for Canada. She wasn't at the Olympics 5 years ago. She might be a little bit too old 3 years from now. This is her prime window. Now, she could still be very good in 3 years, but now is her time. And it would be a tragedy of these kids, their life's work, to just callously say, oh, don't worry, we'll do it again in 3 years.
Yeah. Well, in the timing piece, like you just said, with literally the year you were born or the year that you peak in relation to your sport has always been something with the Olympics that I found heartbreaking. And I hope that we see a shift in different avenues for competition, whether financially compensated or not. Like we were talking about the International Swim League, which doesn't have the same gravitas, but you know, for different levels of athlete in the future, maybe that is the stage they get to, or that is the stage that's available to them.
All it takes is one spark, right? So I found it fascinating, and I don't want to keep you too long, Katie. I appreciate you letting me prattle on here. I found it fascinating that Amazon aired the Australian Olympic trials, because really that is the opportunity for swimming to get a worldwide audience that's pretty interesting, and not just for the swimming, but I think of a sport that I consider, you know, pretty much regionally dead, which was F1 racing. And there's a show on Netflix called Drive to Survive. And if you've ever watched it, it is a fantastic drawing card to bring people back into that sport. And I think that other sports are going to be well served to offer that type of access in the future. So you need those strategic content partners. And if swimming can broaden their relationship with Amazon, I can't think of a bigger, more capable company to be able to bring our sports to more people.
Well, and I think that speaks like to the availability now of different media to fit more niche needs and interests, right? I've always been somebody who, in regular broadcast cable television, there was a lot of shows I wasn't interested in, but my kind of odd interests, I can now find them on Netflix or Prime or by subscribing to one particular channel. And I think a lot of businesses are recognizing that maybe they're not going to grab 13 million people or 4 million people or huge sponsors, but if they can get a rabid, 100,000 or 500,000 people, the stakes are different now and the buy-in is lower, right? The commodification of all these platforms and production costs. I mean, there's no reason why we couldn't see a mini series about swimming consistently, right? Swimming is the #1 sport in Canada by participation. How do we know that there couldn't be a great ongoing weekly series?
Yeah, I mean, they just need to find the right aspect. I'm not going to be involved in that project, so I'm not going to worry about it too much, but one can dare to dream that Amazon will fall in love with swimming and will continue to broadcast it, because they did, just such an amazing job. If you watch it, the cameras, the presentation, it's significantly greater than what you will see either on the CBC or NBC feeds here in North America. That's not to besmirch Byron McDonald. I love Byron. He's going to do a great job of commentary, but Amazon's just got so much money.
Well, but even like we were talking earlier, Dave, about the International Swim League, like they're thinking about broadcasting when they build the pool, when they design the space. And the Olympics, right, with any project of that scale, we're talking a design 10 years ago that's now built, right? There's no immediacy to that design. There's no thinking about the sponsors or revenue, right, fairly or not. And you take a model, whether it's Amazon or the International Swim League, business or financial backing or revenue isn't necessarily bad, especially if it funds the athletes or it funds education or it funds creates bigger interest. But it's how we incorporate it in a way that the audience can benefit.
Yeah, and so the International Swim League, the hope with that is that they will be the entity that pushes the Olympic presentation of swimming into a much more progressive state, because honestly, that's not really in the hands of FINA. FINA controls it, but really, if NBC sees it and they're like, we want that, that's going to be the driver of change. And that's going to be pretty fascinating.
So we're coming up on our cutoff, because Instagram cuts you off after 60 minutes, I learned a couple weeks ago. Final thoughts, Dave. We've talked about FINA, the Olympics, who to watch. Where are you at?
I'm going to watch the Olympics religiously, and really I just hope that these vaccines that we're taking, I got my double, that they're going to take hold and they're going to hold, and we're going to be able to resume to normal so athletes can get their chance. And not just for the high-performance kids, they're great, but really for the grassroots kids. And that goes back to anyone who's kind of watching, who might be a pool manager or works at a pool, is really, we hope to give those kids, children, their experience back and their lifestyle back, because really the Olympics is an exhibition of the top 0.001%, and there's so much good driven through aquatics in the 99.99% that we've desperately missed over the last 16 months, and I hope we can get back soon.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's been an interesting 6 months, and we're all sick of hearing that, sick of saying that, but it is a totally different, you know, whatever we're at now, 16, 18 years in aquatics. There's nothing like this before, and I hope there's nothing like this again.
There will be something like it again. Hopefully I am not part of this funding at that point in time.
I hear you. All right. Well, Dave, Ling, as always, great to chat with you. We have so many shared interests, and I know you're always game, so thanks for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me, Katie. Love you.
Okay, bye. See you soon.